find that the Nagaloka inhabitants, they are actually living under this material universe where Bhurloka is. The Nagas and the serpents, they live in what we call the Saptarian planets. In the 5th canto, if you look at the diagram, you'll find the Saptarian planets, they don't get sun. The light of Surya only comes up to the point of the middle planetary systems. Beyond the middle planetary systems, there is no light in the Saptarian world. But the Saptarian worlds are very well lit. They are lit by the jewels which are on the heads of all these serpents known as Nagas. So that's their light. That's their version of electricity. In fact, Krishna is so kind that even though Surya cannot reach the Saptarian planets, he gives these great serpents jewels on their heads. And these jewels are so shining that they illuminate the entire Saptarian area. So the Nagas, they are praying to Krishna now, because when Nagaloka was conquered by Hiranyakashipu, he stole 2 things precious to them. He stole all their jewels from their heads, and he also stole all their wives, the Nagapatnis. And of course, Prabhupada writes very correctly, when you lose your women and you lose your wealth, then you become very disturbed. And similarly, when a woman loses her husband and she loses her wealth, all inhabitants become disturbed. So that is an important point that Prabhupada brings up. Why does he bring this up in the purport? It's very important to understand that. Prabhupada brings this up because these things like women and wealth, they can easily be forcibly taken away from us. Even without Hiranyakashipu, our wealth will go, isn't it? Even without Hiranyakashipu, eventually our husbands and our wives will have to go. Either they leave us while we are alive, or they leave us because they are going to die or we are going to die. So Prabhupada is making this important point in the purport, that the inhabitants of Nagaloka were crying for that which is material. And because they were attached to their women and attached to their wealth, that's why when Hiranyakashipu came, they became disturbed. But Prahlad Maharaj was not disturbed by Hiranyakashipu because he was neither attached to women, neither was he attached to wealth. And because he was neither attached to anything which was material, and he was only attached to the lotus feet of his Guru Narada Muni and the instructions of his Guru, he was always peaceful despite living next door in the same house with his great demonic father. These inhabitants, they were far away in terms of physical distance from Hiranyakashipu, yet they were always disturbed. Imagine staying with him every day. It must have been hell. And yet, Kayadu, his wife, because she heard from Narada Muni, and Prahlad Maharaj, they were peaceful. Quite peaceful. So this is an important point to remember. The second point that's very important to remember is that now the Nagalokas say, because Krishna, you have killed Hiranyakashipu, we have become relieved. The word relief is very important. Only Krishna consciousness can give us relief in this world. Relief sometimes is explained as temporary cessation of material misery. If you have a headache and you take a paracetamol, sometimes you think that the headache has gone. But medically they'll tell you, no, the headache is still there. You've just suppressed it for a while. So paracetamol acts like that. In the same way, when we get attached to material things, when we depend on material things, we don't realize that we are just taking paracetamol. We're just suppressing for a while the miseries that will keep coming. So the Nagalokas were in difficulty because they were attached to material world. But they became relieved because only Krishna can give us relief. By taking darshan of Krishna, they were in devotional service. By chanting prayers of glorification to Krishna, they became in devotional service. And this is the greatness of Krishna. In the 2nd canto, 4th chapter, I think the verse is 13 or 14, you can look it up. Shukadev Goswami glorifies Krishna. He says, may that Supreme Lord be merciful to me. This is his prayer. And in one of the prayers he says, Bhuyo namasad vrijane chide asatam asambhavaya akila sattva murtaye pumsam punaha paramahamsya ashrame vyavastitanam anumrigyada shuse. This is an important verse for us to remember. Because there, Shukadeva Goswami says, Krishna, you are the complete absolute truth. He's describing Krishna as complete and absolute. Then he says, you are the liberator of the pious devotees. And you liberate them from what? From distress. He says, you are the destroyer of further advances of atheistic temperament that are present in the non-devotee demons. This line exactly refers to what Krishna as Lord Narasimha has done in the 7th canto. By killing Hiranyakashipu, Krishna fulfilled one of his 2 purposes when he comes into this world. The one purpose in which he comes into this world is to check asambhavaya. He checks the atheistic advancement of the demons. Very important point. Hiranyakashipu was moving around unchecked. But Krishna finally decided that I have to check his atheistic temperament. And Prabhupada writes in the purport, Krishna is like a kind father. Sometimes when a child is going out of control, he has to check the child. And sometimes he has to do it with harsh measures. In this case, he had to kill Hiranyakashipu. But because he checked Hiranyakashipu from going further, he gave him salvation. Because Hiranyakashipu ultimately merged into the Lord. And don't forget, Hiranyakashipu is one half of Jai and Vijay. And actually, Jai and Vijay are the great devotees of the Lord. But by the Lord's arrangement, they came as Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu. So even when Krishna desires to help those who are demonic, he does it as a kind father. Though the inhabitants of all these lokas thought they became relieved because Hiranyakashipu was killed, they did not realize that Krishna actually also benedicted Hiranyakashipu. Because by killing him, he gave him relief also. Jai and Vijay did not want to be born as demons. They prayed very hard to Krishna, somehow Krishna bring us back as soon as you can. And by giving Hiranyakashipu salvation, he provided the demon with relief also. But Krishna is so great that with one action, he can actually affect so many inhabitants. And so while he checked the atheistic temperament, he also simultaneously performed the other function when he comes into this world. He actually relieved the distress of his devotees and those who are dependent on him, like all these inhabitants. So whenever we are in difficulty, we should only turn to Krishna, because Bhagavatam tells us that only Krishna has the capacity to give us relief in this material world. And only he has the capacity to check whatever atheistic temperament that we may have in our hearts that takes us away from Krishna. This is an important point. That is why Krishna is glorified. There's that nice verse, Shriyapate, Yajnapate, Prajapati, Diyampati, Lokapati, Dharapati, Patirgatischandakavreshni Satvatam, Prasidatame, Bhagavan Satampati. In the same 4th chapter, after speaking this verse, Shukadev Goswami then glorifies Krishna. Pati means Pati or Patir or Patihi always means Lord. So he says, my dear Lord, you are actually Shriya Patir. You are the Lord of all opulences. Hiranyakashipu had no opulence. You only have your opulence. Yajna Patir, you are the Lord of all sacrifices. We sacrifice for Krishna. We don't sacrifice for anyone else. You are the Lord of all prajas, all living entities. You are the Lord of all dhyam. Dhyam means intelligence. Real intelligence can only come from Krishna. It cannot come from anyone else. You are the Lord of all lokas, all the planets of the world, you are in charge of. That's why the inhabitants are glorifying Krishna. You are the Lord of Dharapati. Even this earth, you are the Lord of. Patir Gatis Chandaka Vrishni Satvatam. You are the Lord of all the descendants of the Vrishni dynasty and the Andhaka dynasty. And then he says, please be merciful to me, O Lord. The same way. So this is the glorification of Krishna. And at the end of these prayers by the Nagalokas, they say something very important. They say, while our wives were trapped and kidnapped, now that you have killed Hiranyakashipu, our wives have become freed. Therefore, you have become the source of pleasure for our wives. Not the husbands. But actually Krishna has become the source of real pleasure for his wives. If you read the 5th canto, 18th chapter, 19th verse, Lakshmi Devi is praying there to Krishna, and her prayer is very, very relevant here. She says, "My dear Lord, you are certainly the fully independent master of all the senses. Because of that, all women who worship you by strictly observing vows because they wish to acquire a husband to satisfy their senses are actually under illusion." Very strong statement from Lakshmi ji. She says, "My Lord, you know, all these ladies, they pray to you to get husbands, they are totally under illusion." Why? She explains. She says, these wives who are praying for husbands, they don't know that such a husband cannot actually give protection to them. Husbands in this world cannot protect their children, nor can these husbands protect their wealth, nor can they protect the duration of life, because these husbands themselves, my dear Lord, they are dependent on time, fruitive results, and the modes of nature. And all these three are ultimately subordinate to you. So this point is important. How can we depend on our husbands, and how can the wives depend on husbands and husbands depend on wives? In this material world, we all depend on everything except Krishna. And because of that, we become bewildered. That's why Krishna advises Arjuna in 1857 of Bhagavad Gita, "Chetasaha sarva karmani, mai sannyasa madparaha, buddhi yogam upashritya, mad chitta sagatam bhava, mad chitta sarva durgani, mad prasada tarisyasi, atachetvam ahankaram, na shroyasi vinamshasi." 1857 and 58 must be studied very nicely. Because there Krishna says very nicely, in all your activities, just depend upon me. This is the starting point of devotional service. How much are we depending on Krishna? These wives got pleasure not from their husbands. They ultimately got pleasure only from Krishna. The husbands may think they get pleasure from wife, but ultimately they can only get pleasure from Krishna. So in Krishna conscious marriage, if husband and wife both put Krishna in the center, then the source of pleasure is always Krishna. Then the marriages are peaceful. If we are not married and we are brahmacharis, but if we depend on anything and everything except Krishna, again we become disturbed, even if we wear saffron. Because only Krishna and the devotees are dependable. Krishna says, depend on me in all your activities. And if you depend on me with your intelligence, then you will become conscious of me. So sometimes people ask, what is the meaning of being conscious of Krishna? It's very simple. The more you depend on Krishna, the more you become conscious of Krishna. Krishna consciousness is defined by how much we depend on Krishna. And Krishna says, the more you depend on me, then by my grace, all impediments of conditioned life will gradually leave you. You can cross it. But Krishna warns Arjuna, if you do not hear my directions, if you do not obey me, and if you do not obey the spiritual master, then you will be directed by a false ego, like Hiranyakashipu. And ultimately, you will be destroyed, because you will be lost. So let us end today's verse by remembering a very important instruction that Narada Muni gave Yudhishthira Maharaj in the first canto, 13th chapter. Yudhishthira Maharaj woke up one morning and found, hey, what happened to Gandhari and what happened to Dhritarashtra? They're not in the house anymore. He became anxious. He looked around wondering, have I offended them? Have they left? Have they gone somewhere? You know, sometimes we get worried for those who depend on us. Naturally, we are concerned about that. Just at that point, Narada Muni comes into the house. And he turns to Narada and says, my dear Narada Muni, you're a pure devotee. Kindly instruct me. Where have my uncle and auntie gone? Are they safe? Are they in trouble? They're very old. They may get lost. What will happen to them? And Narada Muni gives him good advice. He says, Kala karmo gunadino deho yam pancha bhautikaha katham anyams tu gopaye sarpa grasto yatha param. And the meaning is very nice. He says, my dear Yudhishthira Maharaj, this gross material body made of 5 elements is already under the control of Kala, eternal time, Guna, the modes of material nature, and your karmas, the actions. How can this material body, which is already in the jaws of the serpent of time, be able to protect others? In other words, we ourselves cannot protect ourselves. We are already ruled by guna, kala and karma. Do we really falsely think we can protect other people? No. The only best way to give protection to all living entities is to preach to them the glories of the holy name, to give them Krishna consciousness. If we give them Krishna consciousness through all the wonderful activities that we are doing, then they will come out of guna, they will come out of kala, and they will come out of karma. There is no other way. So, the demons today are running the governments, Prabhupada says. In Singapore, I would not be able to read this purport. Because if the Singapore government hears this, it's considered treason. You can be jailed for that. So in Singapore, we always advise speakers, if there are any purports on governments and there's any criticism of governments, please refrain from it. But I'm far away in Denmark, so I'm free at the moment. So that's why Prabhupada has given such a nice purport. He says today, there are also Hiranyakashipus. Because this way of harassing the living entities, by taking their wealth, their women, by exploiting them, it is still there. But there is only one way to mitigate the miseries of all the common people and all the intelligent people. Sanklesha nirvana ushanti nanyataha. Narada Muni tells Vyasa Bhagavan in 1st canto, 5th chapter, 40th verse, that you please distribute the glories of the holy name, broadcast the glories of the Lord. If we are always under the shelter of Srimad Bhagavatam, which is meant for all classes, not just for devotees, but for non-devotees also, then, as sincere souls who want peace of mind, this is the only way that the governments and the Hiranyakashipus can eventually become vanquished. Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki. Are there any questions, any comments? Yes, Prabhu.
I have one doubt I would like you to dissipate, if you so kindly will. Sometimes when we hear verses about like snakes and Prabhupada, he talks about in the purport, I don't remember where, but I'm quite sure I remember reading that when a snake is crowned by a jewel, it's certainly more fearful than one which is not wearing a jewel on its head. And I was just thinking in this connection that, okay, we are not able to evaluate the snakes on Naga to see if they actually have jewels on their head. But I never heard about snakes on this planet with jewels on their head. So I was just wondering if you could.
Actually, yes. Now that you mentioned it, I remember Prabhupada also saying that such snakes actually are also living in the area of Kolkata and Mayapur. Prabhupada has mentioned that before in his conversations. And Prabhupada also mentions that previously snakes who are in this material Bhudloka, they also possess jewels on their heads. But today, because of the advent of Kali Yuga, they also have lost their luster. And that's why only the snakes in the Saptarian planets still possess jewels on their heads. So Prabhupada did mention this point. But he did say that there was a time when you could see snakes with jewels on their heads because they are related to the Nagas of the Saptarian planets. But he said today it is very rare to find that. Because with the advent of Kali Yuga, even the opulence of the snakes, that also has deteriorated. It is not there any longer. So this is what I remember from some conversations that Prabhupada has with some devotees. Yeah. That's what I can share with you.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes, Prabhu.
These Nagas, are they, do they have like a humanoid body, or are they like ordinary snakes?
The description in Nagaloka, if you read in the 5th canto, is that they actually possess snake-like bodies. Just like Vasuki is the king of the snakes from Nagaloka. So descriptions of Vasuki in the 8th canto are there. And he is what you call a typical snake, except that they are much larger, much more vibrant in colors, and they have very precious jewels on their heads. And they are very large, much larger than their cousins in this Bhutloka. But yes, that's how they are. Yes, Mahaprabhu.
Usually we say the P and K,
Yes.
pride, envy and anger.
Yes.
After chanting and after coming into Krishna consciousness itself, we have, and sometimes it comes in ourselves, that sometimes the pride, sometimes the envy, some anger. It comes. So how to avoid that?
If you read Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Harinam Chintamani, which is a very nice area on chanting of the holy name, he actually says, and Prabhupada says this also in the 6th canto in Ajamil's pastime, that when we start chanting the holy names, and if we are not attentive to our chanting, then the offenses of chanting the holy names, they actually cloud the ability for us to have taste for the holy name. And because we are not attentive to hearing the holy name, then these anarthas, which are unwanted desires and things like pride, envy and anger, they continue to fester in our hearts. So sometimes Prabhupada gave the example, when you enter into a room which is very dirty, sometimes the room is so dirty that the dust has settled over years. And when you walk in for a while, the room looks very peaceful. But as soon as you start cleaning the room, then the dust, layers and layers which have been there, they suddenly start acting up. And sometimes people regret, why did I start cleaning the room? Because it seemed alright before that. But the truth is, there was so much dust and it was so settled that we had become conditioned to living in dirt. When the holy name enters into the heart of the living entity in the beginning of our devotional service, and when Krishna cleanses the heart of desire of material enjoyment, that cleansing of the heart is where all these anarthas, they come out. They become visible to the devotee. The devotee then starts to recognize that he is full of anarthas. He begins to understand that he is full of pride, envy and anger, lust, and therefore he should induce in himself the feeling of humility, that he has so much of faults within himself. But these anarthas need to come out. They need to be cleansed. So for a while when the cleansing is going on, the dust is everywhere in the room and we seem to feel very uncomfortable. But eventually when the whole heart is cleansed and the room is cleansed, and when the dust is completely out, then the real purity of the room is actually achieved. So in the same way, when we start devotional service, and if we don't practice it carefully according to the rules and regulations given, when we think that our false ego knows better than Krishna, Prabhupada and the scriptures, then pride, envy and anger is always there. The other simple reason Prabhupada says is, the mother of all offenses is inattentive chanting. If we are not attentive to hearing the holy name, then pride, envy, anger will always exist. It will take a long time for them to be purified. So when a devotee recognizes that these anarthas are in his heart, he should increase the quality of his devotional service. He should become more attentive to the hearing and the reading and the studying, and he should serve the great devotees of the Lord, as Bhagavatam says, so that the pride in the heart will go. Otherwise our tendency is little bit of devotional service and we start criticizing devotees. We build impressions of devotees, oh, he's not as advanced as him, he is more advanced than him. But who are we to understand these things? We ourselves are full of dirt. So instead of wasting time judging and criticizing, we should look at our own faults and then work on our devotional service. Then the pride will go. Hare Krishna. Yes, Prabhu. Oh, sorry, actually, Mataji, you had put up your hand before that, so I'll just ask. Yes.
Okay. It is about relationship between husband and wife, because I heard that it is based on envy. But in Krishna consciousness, is it not different? Because there you also want the best for each other to advance in Krishna consciousness, and you also have, it seems also to me that this responsibility that you have in that ashram, to you should not become a father or a husband, you know, without being able to deliver your dependent.
Yes.
Because when you are close with other devotees and you have a responsibility, then sometimes it's more difficult to discriminate what is in me and what is actually a great desire to improve the situation. So if you can comment.
Actually, there is a very good litmus test to understand if we are envious. And the litmus test is, every time we are envious, we are disturbed. If we really care for our wives, our husbands, or even our fellow devotees, their anxiety of trying to serve them will not disturb us. It will give us inspiration. But if it disturbs us, then it is to be understood that actually we are having some subtle envy. Envy always causes disturbance. But as to the point that you said about husband and wife, generally Bhagavatam tells us that naturally when husband and wife are devotees and they put Krishna in the center and they are very careful to know that their duty is to help deliver the dependents, then they will work extra hard in devotional service to ensure that somehow or another, by the grace of Krishna and Guru, they should be able to give Krishna consciousness to those who depend on them. In fact, that becomes an incentive for them to lead a more Krishna conscious lifestyle. It doesn't become an onerous responsibility. Positively taken, it actually gives them a great motivation to improve themselves as devotees. I have had personal experience that when the children came, I found that I had to definitely become more vigilant in my own devotional service, mindful of the teachings of Bishop Dev. So actually, that point that Bishop Dev brings up, if we take it positively and constructively, then for those who depend on us, whether we are in the ashram of Grihastha or not, there will always be people who depend on us. Then the responsibility of working hard to become better devotees so we can serve others actually is encouraged. Is that helpful, Mataji? Thank you. I think it is time. Oh, can we take one more question?
One more.
Okay.
Yeah. About not finding faults in others. Isn't it sometimes relevant to find faults in a person or a devotee to see if there are some bad elements that you should avoid?
That's a very good point. Discrimination is necessary, but it is different from fault finding. Fault finding is based on the idea that we don't like to see someone doing better than us. But discrimination is when we realize that, yes, factually speaking, whenever I take association with this person, I recognize that there are some qualities that I've read in Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita which I should avoid, and this person is displaying. Therefore, because I don't want to offend this person, and because I am not strong enough to counter these qualities, it is better for me to maintain a reasonable distance, maybe to just say Hare Krishna, but not beyond that. In Bhagavatam 3rd canto, 25th chapter, under the title of the glories of devotional service, 29th chapter, there is this description of devotional service in the modes. Because we are not pure devotees, Kapila Dev says sometimes we conduct devotional service also in the modes. When a devotee conducts devotional service in the mode of passion, he is always envious of other devotees. He is always angry with other devotees. And Prabhupada writes in the purport, when one encounters such exhibitions of anger or disturbance, then Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Prabhupada quotes, tells us to have arm's length transaction. Because he is Vaishnava, we respect such a devotee. But beyond that, there is no need for us to take further association. Because we are neither his spiritual master to correct him, but we should turn the matters over to the proper authorities, because that is the proper etiquette. In that way, we also don't get into the realm of criticism, but we have to discriminate. So a devotee is at the same time not naive. He is not foolish to say that because I don't criticize